How important is the individual? Hi, I'm John. Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. How important is the individual? Once again, this is one of the basic and most important questions in philosophy, right? How important is the individual? So, let's start with what is the individual? And I think we got to take it all the way back to beginnings of creation, right? You have the void, you have nothing, and then all of a sudden you have life. And within life, the energies have been parsed down into individual units of various degrees in various animus and inanimus, right? Various things that are animated and non-animated. Going through all that, and when we contrast what's in creation to what's occurring on Earth, which is where our philosophical conversation is happening, and we look at human beings that have been created in contrast to them not existing. At one point we didn't exist, now all of a sudden there's human beings on this planet. And by cursory examination of a human being, and by listening to what human beings have reported about the experience throughout the existence of the species, it's safe to say that the human experience is one in which a consciousness takes human form, it takes form, material form, that it is housing an individual perspective. We have that report back from human beings across time, across culture, every single part of the globe, every single circumstance that human beings exist in. There's at least one representative that says, I am an individual, I am a consciousness having an experience as an individual that is being facilitated by my human body. That is a fact. That has been reported from time immemorial. I am a consciousness housed in a human body having an individual experience, having an experience of being an individual apart from the ocean of consciousness from which I sense that I came from, which in philosophical terms we can't prove, but in philosophical terms we can deduce that that's true. Because when you go back to quantum mechanics and you go through the energy realms and you go through metaphysics and you get a very clear understanding that the life that we're engaged in, where things have been individuated, things have taken individual forms that they have limits, they have physical limits, they have boundaries, they are contained. The individual is contained in a body, and in this case, where we're specifically getting to the worth of a human individual, how important is the human as an individual? I see it that in philosophical terms, the function of the human life is to provide an individual experience. If we contrast, if we assume, or if we look at, no assumption, let's look at what the universe is and how it animates life. We see that there are experiences being had, and through the observation of evolution and through self-guided aware reports from human beings throughout the eon, that there is a process of becoming aware of the experience of being an individual that seems to be intrinsically catalyzed by being an individual, and further accelerated by the knowledge of the fact that one's being an individual in as a part of an evolutionary process that's not personal, because the human bodies exist before me, after me, and they're completely out of my control. But through circumstances, which are open for another discussion another time, I, and I have it on good authority that other people have made the exact same discovery, am in a form that is allowing me to have an individual experience. And in those individual experiences, we are reporting back an enrichment of the internal life, an enrichment of the soul, an enrichment of the mind, even before we get into things that are even without spiritual context, the individual experience has allowed a person to grow demonstrable skills. You can go from, for one, you can go from childhood to adulthood. There's a whole spectrum of experience there. And you can say it's ineffable, but really it's not. It's universal. So that alone is a process of the individual having an experience, just aging, just being born, interacting with other individuals, expanding their minds, expanding all these different things about them. They're demonstrable proofs of the utility of the human life as a vehicle for individual experience. And in that light, I think it's clear that since that seems to be the primary function of the human species, of the human experience, is to allow for an individual experience to occur for a temporal amount of time, that means the individual is the most important consideration, and the individual experience is the most important consideration when becoming aware of a hierarchy of importance of what's occurring in the reality. So, in order to determine how important the individual is, before we use that as a benchmark for other discussions to discuss ethics and societies and how things are all arranged, because they're only arranged based on the individual, we must decide that in relation to what appears to be the function of reality itself, that's a much deeper discussion, obviously, but on the face of it, in this material realm on Earth, in the human experience, the function of consciousnesses being in bodies is reported back and generally agreed to be the enrichment of the inner life through external action and interaction. And that process which occurs and which grows us and unlocks higher levels and different frequencies of perspective and different doors of perception to be open in a reflexive manner, which is well reported on, then we can get to a point where we say what Carl Jung is describing is correct. The process of individuation, the process of the person becoming integrated with self, with things that are the person consciously is aware of, things that are unconsciously aware of, the fact that you can be consciously aware of the unconscious and not know even what's in the unconscious, but to know that it exists in an open field that's possible. All of these things, me just saying those things, are demonstrations of growth, because those are things I couldn't say when I was 7 years old or 10 years old. And so in terms of the worth of the individual, it's the growth and the expansion of the awareness and the enrichment of the inner life and the emotions that are felt, the electricity that we conduct, and the fact that when individuals come together, especially when individuals who are aware of their importance of the individual experience and their individuation occurring, when they come together with others, then there's a synergistic group function that unlocks, that also starts to begin to interact with the greater reality as a whole. So in terms of the individual's importance, it's exceptionally important, because a lot of systems that are built are only built around individuals, and so the system can only be as worth as much as the individual's value is. And the individual value is derived from the awareness that the individual experience is the whole point of life on Earth. You got to get the individuation occurring, and then when the transcendence comes in and the sublimation into collectivism, like organic collectivism, which is nature, keeping in mind that through cursory study of the universe, it becomes apparent that the individual experience is not the base. It's not the base mode. That it's all very flowy and consciousness based, and essences and energies and frequencies are the main order of the day. So to have what's agreed on to be a temporal individual experience, which means that we know that we're born and we're going to die, so it's temporary, temporal, it's temporary experience, and then we know that the focus of this temporary experience is the individual experience. without trying to control it, without trying to say, because the nature of the individual experience can be whatever, but the individual experience itself is the design, it is the function, it is the utility of this time and space that we're in, which is the context for human philosophical discussion. So moving forward, any system that refers back to individuals and their worth in this fundamental ranking and seeing clearly what it is and like how important it is for the individual, like the individual experience, it's essentially it's the ultimate, really. It's the ultimate, and it should be held in that esteem when deriving, like we talked about morals earlier. Well, moral decisions really help. That is the process of the individual being individuated, being responsible for your own moral choices and growing yourself and evolving yourself in a self-aware manner. That is the demonstration, that is the proof of the worth of the individual. The act of self-guided self-awareness that gives you feedback as to whether or not you're making decisions that are good or bad, and those decisions that are good or bad are really reads that are coming back from like your relation to the collective, whichever collective it is the proof that the individual experience is the most important thing. In fact, it's the only thing. Like a group experience doesn't really exist, even in so much that it's a collection of individuals who are having an individual experience of like a group consciousness or a group activity. But it still comes back down to the individual experience, and that is to be held in the highest esteem, because that is the only true experience that's being had on Earth right now, are individual experiences. And in fact, a lot of people who argue against that are really people who are just trying to manipulate the collective so that their individual experience is better. And oftentimes they know that. Like true deception is trying to convince other people that their individual experience is in importance to better their own. But essentially, the function of life on Earth is to allow for an individual experience to occur. Furthermore, a self-aware individual experience can rise up within the individual, which is typically that's typically a differentiation point between humans and other animals on the planet, is the ability of transcendence, to have an individual experience and then use that as the foundation, the fundamental launching pad for transcendental perspective, and then eventually, enlightenment, which is holistic, which is all takes place on Earth through the vessel of an individual experience. And the reports are that when the experience of the individual experience is tampered with or somehow attempted to be manipulated, that it very oftentimes derails that built-in ascension that the humans have for an individual experience. So the individual might be the most important. The individual experience is the most important experience on Earth. It seems to be that that's what it was set up for, and it seems to be that all the great things that happen from great individual accomplishments that actually propel the species forward happen because the nature and the value and the quality of the individual experience produced some epiphanies in individuals who then turn around and shared it with the collective. There's almost no example in history where it goes the other way around, where like collectives rarely have epiphanies that move the species forward, if ever. But in the human experience, based on individualism, we've produced pretty much all the genius comes through in the form of an individual, which is what Carl Jung is saying with individuation. That like it gets you into a point where like you actually become the consciousness made matter that we need. So, individuals are responsible for, Beethoven and Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Jesus and Buddha and, like fill in the blanks. Like any person who's greatly affected, especially positively, but also negatively. Like for every individual, they've brought up the archetype of the issues of those like relatable life paths that they've been on. So whether it's Gandhi or Stalin, you're seeing the high impact of the individual experience and the effects that they can have. And without that, if you view the evolutionary bubble of humanity and you imagine it without individuals, where in this case the individual being like a single human that uh, accelerates their evolution or makes great leaps for mankind and brings it back to the collective, if you want to know how important the individual is, remove all of those positive anomalous outliers from the evolution of the human species, and you'll see that the human species just wouldn't, it really just wouldn't grow much, right? It may not have even like have gotten out of the jungles. It may still be in animal form, still contending with regular basic flesh and blood animals and predators. But somewhere along the way, due to the facility of the human body to facilitate, quite frankly, a ridiculous cosmic universal creation individual experience, and for the ability for that to facilitate huge leaps in evolution and consciousness in one lifetime, I think it becomes very clear that the individual experience is the sacred experience on Earth. So that was today. That was how important is the individual, and I think we got a pretty good starter on that one. I think you can get the general idea, and as always, feel free to make your own videos. I encourage you to think for yourself, figure it out. You're an individual, and now you know that's a sacred thing. So I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner.